Let's start by taking a look at the project that we're going to be designing throughout this section as we learn about all the different web design rules. And just like in the other sections, the first thing that we need is to get our starter files from the code that we downloaded in the very beginning. So here in the starter files, we need now this folder design. So for the first time, this project is not going to build on the previous one. So here you really need to go into your starter files and grab this folder here. So paste that wherever you are working. For me, it's the desktop. Let's close this down. And then I'm just opening a new VS Code window. All right. And then you can click open here, or also in the menu bar, you can use open in there. So from the desktop, we want the design folder. And so this is now our new project folder. So here we already have an index.html file and a style.css as well, along with a couple of images that we need for this project as well. Now what's different about this project is that this time I already coded all the HTML that we're going to need for this project. So basically what we're going to do as we go through this section is to adjust the CSS and also learn some new CSS properties in order to apply these different web design rules. But now let's take a look by clicking here on Go Live. And this is how our project looks like in the very beginning. So it's really just a bare bone web page, everything in black and white. And everything I did here was to simply apply some margins. And I also already built the layout. So what I want you to do after this video is to take 10 or 15 minutes to analyze this HTML and also the CSS that I wrote. So for example, here we have this global reset as always. We have a container element. And we have some CSS grid here also applied to this page. So for example, here we have these 3 columns. And so there we use this grid 3 calls class. So this one here. So this is basically grid with 3 columns. So inside of this section. So yeah, so it's just a grid with 3 columns as I was saying. So that's why we have repeat 3 times 1 FR. So just as we learned in the previous section. Then here in the header, there is another grid with these 2 elements here side by side. And yeah, as I was saying, there's a lot of margins already being applied, but basically that's it. So again, I think it would be a very good idea that you analyze this CSS code and also the HTML. So this here is an element that I think we didn't use before. But basically the element already says what it is. So this is just a semantic element, which means that it is a section. So for example, this one here is going to be one section, then this one, and all of this here. So those are sections in the web page. And so we have an element in HTML, which is exactly called section. So once again, we could have used a generic div here, but div doesn't have any meaning. And section does. So that's the better choice. Then another element that is important is the span element. Yeah, this here right here. So as it says here actually, the span is just a generic inline element that we use for text, but it doesn't have any meaning. So it's a little bit like the div element, which also doesn't have any meaning, but for inline elements. So when we just need a small element for some text, we always reach for the span element. All right. And then here was also the black quote element that we didn't talk about before. And this one is simply usually to write some quote. So quoting someone in this case is writing their testimonial. So it's basically Mary and Sarah saying something about these chairs. And so for that, we can use a block quote. All right. So again, take some time to go through all this code and try to understand it. And again, if you don't understand everything 100%, that's not a problem at all, because the main focus of this section is not really in the code, at least not so much in the HTML, but it's really on the web design rules and guidelines that we're about to learn. And speaking of that, the final result of this project will not be this, but this. So this looks quite different, right? It has a different typeface, so a different font, a more modern one. It has some green colors here, and the text is also not black. And there's a lot of rules here applied that make the typography look really good. Then we have these cards here with some shadows, and everything is nicely rounded. And we have this accent color here in the bottom. So yeah, this is basically applying some of the guidelines that we're going to learn through this project here, as it looks like in the beginning. So I hope that sounds exciting, and so let's now actually get started with learning about web design. Now, before we can learn about the different web design rules one by one, we need to start by talking about what web design actually is, why it's so important, and also why and how everyone can learn good web design. So, first of all, we need to distinguish between web design and web development. So basically, web designers are who create the overall look and feel of websites, while on the other hand, web developers are the ones who then implement the design using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Now, back in the day, designers only designed using some web design program such as Sketch, Figma, or Photoshop. The developer would then take that design and implement it in code using some software such as VS Code, so that in the end, the website could be displayed for the user in a browser. However, nowadays there are also many designers who code and many developers who design. And so the goal of this section is to transform you to a developer who also designs, so that basically you can become a designer and a developer who can write and build and design websites only using code. So, our focus in this course will of course be learning HTML and CSS, so basically writing code, but in my opinion, a modern web developer should also be able to create simple and good-looking designs. And so that's what I want to teach you in this section. But first, let's explore a little bit why design is actually so important. So, when a user visits a well-designed website or web application, then that good design immediately creates a lasting good impression of the brand or the product that is behind that website. However, if the site was badly designed, then the user would believe that the brand doesn't really care about the product or the service that they're offering. And so when you build a website, of course, you do not want to create that impression, right? Also, good design makes the user trust the brand right away, while on the other hand, a website with bad design makes the user insecure about even trusting that company or the brand. Another really important reason for investing a lot of time and effort into a well-designed product is that good design increases the perceived value of the brand or the product that the user is visiting, while bad design simply makes the brand look kind of cheap. And I'm sure that you have experienced this yourself when you, for example, check out two competing websites of two competing products. So probably you get a better impression of the product that has the good-looking website, and you also trust the brand more and kind of feel that that product is worth more. At least for me, it sure works like this, and there's a lot of research indicating that this is how it works for the general users. And so again, it's really, really important that you or your company or whoever you're working for invest in really good design for their websites and web applications. Finally, good design also gives users exactly what they were actually looking for when they decided to come to the site in the first place. For example, let's say you're looking to buy a TV. So in that case, you want that web page for the TV to give you all the information as fast as possible. And so for that, it's important that the page is well designed. You don't want to be confused and have to leave the page because you cannot reach your goal, right? And that's what would happen if the page was badly designed. Okay, and I hope that with this I could convince you that design cannot just be an afterthought. It needs to be central to building any product, so any website or any web application. Now, many people are already aware about how important web design is. However, they will say something like, "Oh, I'm not creative," or, "Well, I'm not an artist, and so I could never learn design." However, in my opinion, that is not really true, because good web design is actually not subjective and has not much to do with creativity. For example, I myself couldn't be any further from being an artist, and I'm also not particularly creative. But still, I can design a decent looking interface by following a simple framework or a system, such as the one that I want to teach you in this course. And so I really believe that anyone can learn good web design. You don't need to be creative and you don't need to be an artist. All you need to do is to learn some rules and some guidelines along with some system that you then need to follow in order to build a nice looking interface for your own projects. Now, what kind of framework or system will I actually teach you, and how am I going to do that? Well, what I did was to analyze hundreds or maybe thousands of really well-designed websites. So I carefully analyzed and deconstructed the design of all these websites and then distilled everything that I learned into a couple of rules that are easy for you to learn and, even more importantly, easy to apply. Now, these rules are divided into 9 different areas of web design, which I call the ingredients. And you will see what the ingredients are in a minute. But what matters is that there are many different rules for each of these ingredients, and once you have the rules, you will then be able to apply them to any website based on something that I call the website personality. But more about that also a bit later in this lecture. For now, let's take a look at what I call the ingredients of web design. So, web design ingredients probably sounded a bit abstract, and so let me now show you what I'm talking about in this well-designed website. So the first ingredient is typography, which is all about formatting and designing text. Then the next one is colors, which is another crucial part. And then we're going to talk about images and illustrations, which are another fundamental aspect that any website cannot miss. So there cannot be a website without images, and so there are rules about how we can actually use images in an effective way. Also, many modern websites have icons, and so we also need to talk about that, as well as about shadows and border radius. Now, border radius, which is basically the general roundness of the elements on a page, might seem a little bit insignificant, but actually it's not. So different border radius actually give a website completely different looks and feels. Next up, we will talk about white space and also to the very closely related topic that is visual hierarchy. Finally, we will also have a lecture on user experience and also about components and layouts. So basically, where we're going to learn how you can use different components and types of layouts to represent different kinds of information. And here we're going to have a lot of different examples and different types of components. And this lecture actually we're going to leave for the next section because this is a special kind of ingredient where there aren't really any rules. But it's still affected by the website personality, and so I'm listing that here as well. And speaking about the website personality, this is a concept that I came up with, and It will make it so that we will take the design decisions for each of these ingredients based on that website personality. Now, there is a whole lecture about website personalities at the end of this section, but for now, let's finish this lecture by getting an overview about each of the 7 different website personalities. The first personality is the serious or elegant personality, which we can use to convey luxury and elegance. And we do that by using thin serif typefaces, golden or pastel colors, and high big quality images. Next up, there is the minimalist or simple website personality. And this one focuses mainly on the important text content and uses small or medium-sized black text. Many times it uses some lines as well, and very few images and icons. And if they have icons, they are very small. Next, there is the plain or neutral personality, which is used many times in big and well-established corporations, such as Microsoft or Adobe. And in this personality, the design gets out of the way by using neutral and small typefaces and a very structured layout. Then we have the bold or confident personality, which makes an impact by featuring big and bold typography together with bright and big color blocks like the ones you see here on this page. Now, personality number 5 is the opposite of this one, which is calm and peaceful. So this one is used many times for products and services that try to convey the idea that they care about the consumer. And they do this by using calming pastel colors like these background colors on this page, and also soft serif headings together with images and illustrations that match the typeface or the colors. Now next up, there is the very important startup and upbeat personality. And as the name says, this one is used a lot in startup companies. And this website personality uses modern-looking sans serif typefaces, light gray text and backgrounds, together with rounded elements. Finally, to finish, there is the playful or fun personality, which consists of colorful and round designs, which are created basically by using creative elements such as hand-drawn icons or illustrations, lots of animations, and also the language of the content itself helps to convey the playful or fun personality. Okay, so this was just an overview of the different website personalities, but again, the idea is that different design decisions, for example in colors or typography or images that are going to be used, will depend on what website personality you want for your design. Because as you hopefully got from this overview, different types of products or websites require completely different website personalities. So we will have to keep that in mind. But again, we will talk later about this. So for now, we want to study the rules for each of the design ingredients that we learned about earlier. And so let's now go do that in the next lecture, starting with typography. Welcome back. And let's start with probably the most important design ingredient of all, which is typography. And this is going to be the lecture with the most rules of all, and so let's get started right away. And we will start this lecture with 2 concepts that you need to know before learning about typography rules. And the first one is what typography actually is. So according to Wikipedia, typography is the art and technique of arranging type to make written language legible, readable, and also appealing when applied. Or in other words, typography is all about making text beautiful and easy to read. Next, we need to talk about serif and sans serif typefaces. And I already used these terms a little bit before, so serif and sans serif, but now it's time to finally learn what they actually mean. So a serif typeface looks like this. So it has these small details like these tails at the end of the lines, which we call serifs. And so that's why this typeface is called a serif typeface. And serif typefaces are the more traditional typefaces, and therefore we can use them to create more traditional or classic looking interfaces. They also make the design convey trustworthiness for the user, and finally, it's also good for long text, for example, in an article or an online magazine. Now, on the other hand, of course, we have sans serif typefaces. So typefaces which do not have these decorative lines, so the serifs that these serif typefaces have. And sans serif typefaces usually look very clean and simple, and therefore by using them we can give any interface a very modern look and feel, just like on this example here. So an extremely easy example, but if you just compare the two texts in these two images, you will notice that the text in the first image gives the interface a completely different look and feel, like a completely different feeling and a different vibe in a way. And so that's the power of a serif and a sans serif typeface here in action. Now, in my experience, it's a lot easier to choose a sans serif typeface that fits the vibe and the personality of a design than to choose a serif typeface. So, in other words, for beginners, it's way easier to work with sans serif typefaces. So just keep that in mind once you start building your own designs. And now let's actually start with the rules. And the first one is to only use good and popular typefaces and play it safe. And with playing it safe, I mean to not choose any crazy or weird looking typefaces. That's usually never a good idea. So let me give you a couple of examples of sans serif typefaces. So one very nice one that I like a lot right now is called Inter, which looks like this. And by the way, this typeface and all the other ones that I'm going to show you in this video are available on Google Fonts and Font Squirrel. So these two websites, and especially Google Fonts, is part of our, let's say, design toolbox. So the toolbox is, as the name says, a lot of different tools that we need to use when we want to design for the web. And as we go through this section, we will start filling up our toolbox. All right. And again, all these different tools, so these different websites and web applications, are linked on my resources page. So you can very easily find all the tools that I mentioned throughout this section right there on my website, on my resources page. But anyway, let's now take a look at some more. So this one is OpenSens, then we have Roboto, Montserrat, WorkSens, and Lado. So these are 6 very good sans serif typefaces which you can use without any problem. Now, at first sight, to the untrained eye, these 6 typefaces might actually look almost the same. But believe me, they are really not the same. So if you would apply these 6 different typefaces to your page one by one, you would create like 6 completely different looking websites. But anyway, if you're looking for a serif typeface, then let me show you 6 examples of free serif typefaces. Oh, and I forgot to mention that these 6 sans serif typefaces are actually also all for free, of course, such as basically all the other tools that I listed on my resources page. But now about these serif typefaces. Here they are, so Merriweather, Aleo, Playfair Display, Cormorant, Cardo, and Laura. And again, they probably all look very much the same, but well, they are not the same at all. These are even more different between each other than the sans serif ones that I showed you. Now, many beginner designers think that they need to mix multiple typefaces in order to create a nice looking design. But that's actually not true. So when you're just starting out, it's completely okay to use only one typeface on one page. And if you're really feeling adventurous, then still limit your typefaces to 2. If you use more than that, then your design will start looking like amateurish and strange. But now about actually choosing the right typeface for your design, again, you will need to think about your website personality. So choose the right personality for your website, and again, more about this later. So don't stress about the personality for now, but this is still important for this instruction that I'm going to give you. So you choose the personality, then you decide between a serif and a sans serif typeface, and then you can experiment with all the good typefaces that I just showed you. And of course, you don't need to limit yourself to these 6. You can of course also experiment with many other typefaces that are available on Google Fonts. So based on this experimentation, you can see which of the typefaces is best to convey the message of your website. And of course, for a beginner, that's not really so simple, but trust me that with experience, this will come naturally to you. Finally, of course, you can also keep trying different typefaces as you design and build a page. So you don't need to really decide for one in the very beginning. You can just start by using one, and then as you're in the middle of your design process, you can just choose another one. And many times this is actually what I do, because when I have more content on the page, it then becomes more obvious and it becomes easier to see which of the typefaces best fits the website's message. Okay, so these are the basic rules on how to choose good typefaces. But now we also need to choose good font sizes and weights. So let's see how. So when you're looking to choose a font size, you should limit your choices to make your life easier. To do that, you can use a typescale tool or another predefined range of font sizes. Because if you do that, then you don't have to constantly think about coming up with font size values. And actually, we will do that in the big course project and even in the project that is in this section. Now, with that being said, let's now talk about some guidelines for actual font size values in different parts of websites. So, for normal text, you should use a font size between 16 and 32 pixels. So, in this example of this page, for example, the navigation has 16 pixels, and then this smaller text down here is an 18 pixels. All right. And by the way, this is going to be a long list of guidelines like this, and so you should totally print out these slides to make it easier for you to follow them later when you design on your own. But anyway, for a long text format, you can try a font size of 20 pixels or even bigger, because if the user needs to read something like a blog post, it's going to be far easier if the text is a little bit bigger. So for example, this text down here in the example, which describes this section, has a 20 pixels text. Also, this text up here, which kind of describes the company, has 24 pixels, and this text below has 32, which we can kind of count actually as normal text. So again, it is in the range of rule 5, so between 16 and 32 pixels. And of course, this is just one small example amongst thousands and thousands of web designs, but I just want you to get a sense for the kind of values that we can use in designs. But anyway, for big headlines, you can actually go really big with your font sizes, like even more than 50 pixels, and you can also make them really bold, like more than 600. And we didn't learn about these bold values yet, but we will, maybe in the next lecture or maybe in our big course project. So the headline of this design has a font size of 85 pixels, and it is also really bold with a boldness of 700. Also, this other, a bit smaller headline down here has 64 pixels of size and is still really bold at 700. Oh, and then we also have 42 pixels here in this testimonial text. Now, the final rule about using good font sizes and weights is to use a font weight that is not under 400. So if you go below 400, that would be light or really light text, and that is then hard to read. So just don't go below 400, which is basically a regular font weight. Now next up, let's learn a couple of guidelines and rules to create a good reading experience for your users, which, remember, is one of the aspects of typography. Remember? So, to start, you should try to use less than 75 characters per line, like in this example here. So these lines here have something between 65 and 72 characters, which makes this text really easy to read. However, if you break this rule, you might end up creating something like this, which is really hard to read for your eyes. So here the lines have between 95 and 112 characters, and if you actually try to read this, you will find it a bit difficult to follow such a long line. Next, for a text with normal size, try to use a line height between 1.5 and 2. Now, if the text is really big, like a headline, you can go below 1.5, and actually you can go really low, something like 1.1 or 1.2. So a good rule of thumb that you keep in mind is that the smaller or the longer the text is, the larger the line height needs to be. So here we have some good readable examples with the big headline having only 1.2. Then as the text gets smaller, we have 1.31, and then the long text has 1.5. Now, if you use an oversized line height like this, then your text again becomes hard to read. So we're creating a bad reading experience for your users because these lines look kind of detached. And so then our eyes have difficulty going from one line to the next one as we read the text. Now, another nice and very subtle rule that can make a lot of difference is that if your headline kind of looks unnatural, you can try to decrease the letter spacing. Now, what unnatural actually means will of course come from experience, but I'm going to show you a couple of examples right now and also through the rest of the course. So in this headline, for example, we have a letter spacing of minus 3.5 pixels. And if you ask me, this looks quite nice and quite natural. While on the other hand, if it was just 0 pixels, so basically without us defining any letter spacing, then the letters would look kind of detached from one another. Next, another thing that you can try, and which is actually very popular among designers, is to use all caps for short titles. Now, if you do this, then you should also make this title quite small and also bold and increase the letter spacing, just like this interface here does. So basically, we have one main heading here, and then we have kind of a subtitle which describes that heading, and that is the one that uses caps and bold and big letter spacing. And without doing all that, it would simply look like this, which, if you ask me, is a little bit more boring. Okay, and we're almost reaching the end here, so just hang in there. So usually on the web, we do never justify text. So it's somehow just a convention that basically no website ever justifies their text. And so you should also follow that convention. So not centering text looks like this, which is exactly what we're used when we read some blog posts, for example, on the web. While on the other hand, I bet you're not used to see text like this on the web, right? And so therefore, if you were to design a page like this, that would then look quite unnatural. Now also about aligning text, you should usually not center text unless we are talking about really small text blocks. So you can just leave text like this aligned to the left and not like this in the center. Because once again, this actually makes it a lot harder to read the text when you need to jump from one line to the next one. Okay, so that's it about guidelines and rules for typography. Now, of course, there are many rules here, and we cannot always follow all of them in all designs. And so that's why they are more like guidelines and not really strict and hard rules. Okay? Now, something that I didn't mention here is that we also need to be careful about the color of our text. But actually, we will leave that for the next lecture when we talk all about colors. But now let's actually go ahead and implement some of these guidelines in practice in the project of this section. So I hope to see you there soon. So let's now add some nice typography to our project. And we're going to start with the typeface itself. And so let's analyze this web page actually a little bit. So this web page is basically for a small chair design shop in Lisbon. So these guys are basically designers or architects who build these kind of minimalist chairs. So these and these. And so clearly we are going to want to give this interface here a clean and modern look. So what that means is that we're going to reach for a sans serif typeface. And one of the sans serif typefaces that I like the most, especially for something like designers or architects, would be Inter. So let's go here to Google Fonts, which is at fonts.google.com. And once again, the link will also be on my resources page, which we cannot use right now because it's not ready yet. But once you're watching this course, it will be. Anyway, you can see that there are over 1,000 typefaces right now on Google Fonts, and this number is always growing. And here is, for example, Roboto, which is one of the ones that I had recommended you, or Open Sans. Lato, I think, is also one of the really popular ones. But as I said, let's actually use Inter in this project, and we can then also experiment with some other ones. So now here in Google Fonts, you just need to click on the typeface like this. And then here we actually can select the styles that we need. And styles basically means different font weights that we want. So remember how I said that you shouldn't go usually below 400. So these here are really thin and light, so don't use those. So let's start with 400, which is regular. And so we need to select this style. So just click this button here. Now, by the time you're watching this lecture, this whole interface might actually look completely different, because actually Google Fonts changes the way they look all the time. And so if it does look different, then you still need to look for some button with which you can basically add these different styles. So usually we want a 400, then we also want a bold one, which is usually a 700, and then also one in between, like 500 or 600, which is medium and semi-bold. And I will just go for the, let's say, 500 here. Okay. Then once we are ready, we can click here. So see the selected families, which are Inter, 4, 5, and 700. So that's all that we want. And we could add more typefaces here actually, but for now, let's not do that. Let's just go with Inter. And then all we need to do is to copy this link here. So I'm copying it now. And then in our HTML, in the head, we can link that. And we need to do it before our own CSS file. Okay, then save it. And so now we get two new link elements here coming from Google Fonts. And the one that actually matters to us is this one. So this second one, where basically a new style sheet is loaded in, but from Google Fonts. So remember that we link our own style sheet, also using the link element, and then href to our own CSS file, right? And so this one here is similar. So it's still a style sheet, and we still have an href, with the difference that this is a URL which comes from another server. And in this case, that other server is Google. So fonts.googleapis.com. Okay, and now what we can do here is to set the font family on the body to Inter. So use quotes for that, which are actually not necessary, but I think it's a good practice to always use these quotes. So what this comma here means is that the priority font family will be Inter, but if for some reason that's not available, then use this second option here, which is simply the default sans serif. All right. So for example, if there's no internet connection, then you will not be able to load Inter from Google Fonts, and then simply sans serif will be used. And here we could actually keep adding more and more options, but for now we just have these two. And then, as you already know, all the elements will inherit the font family here from the body, which is the parent element. And so if we now take a look here, then you see that it already changed. And if you ask me, this actually looks a lot nicer than what we had before. So that default sans serif. You can inspect this actually and turn it on and off just to see the result. So here, well then by default we actually get the serif typeface, but we can just delete this here and then watch what happens. So there's not a lot of difference there, but these small differences make all the difference between a well-designed and a, well, let's say medium-designed interface. So let's of course put that back. And now let's talk a little bit about font sizes actually. So one of the things that I mentioned in the last lecture is that when it comes to choosing font sizes, it's good to have a system, because with that, we do not have to always think about what size we want to give to a certain element. That would be a lot of work, and it would also lead to inconsistent results. So I have this system here, and whenever I need to choose a font size, I can only choose one of these different options. Now this typescale, as it's called, comes from this tool that I also mentioned. So typescale.com, and I actually didn't use one exact like this, so I built my own, which is the one that we will use in the OmniFoot project, and that's why we are also using it here. But you could also create your own. For example, you can choose one of these, let's say this one, and then, well, you just need to copy these values here. Okay, and if you need more, you can just keep clicking here. And the lower the value here, the more different sizes you will get. So the more similar actually they will all be. If we do that again now, then you see that each one is a lot bigger than the one before, right? But anyway, going back to our page now, we need to start by giving this heading a larger font size. So that is the H1. So right here. And so looking at our system, well, which is now up here, so let's go back actually, we can try different values. For example, let's say 44, 52, and 62. Just grab these. Right. So font size, let's say, start with the largest one, 62 pixels. And that is huge, right? That's way too big. And so let's simply go one down. So imagine that we didn't have this kind of limited choices. Then you could say, well, maybe we want 40, something like this. But, well, why not 45, like this? Or, well, since we're at it, why not 50? So you wouldn't really know what to choose. And with this, again, you have your options very limited. And so, yeah, we saw that 62 doesn't work. Let's try 52. It's also way too big, I guess. So let's go with 44. So that looks nice, right? So I'm going to keep that one here. But I also want to decrease a lot the line spacing here. Actually remove this here. So this is actually enough like this. Okay, so this is easier to work with. So let's see, by default, what our line height is. So it should be somewhere in here. And if it's not, then let me show you a trick that I didn't show you before. Because this first tab here, where it says styles, is simply the styles that are applied somewhere here in our code or maybe by default. But if you go to compute it, then you can see that even better. So you can now write here the line height. Well, that's nowhere to be found, which is strange. Let's click here on show all. Yeah, so now you see line height is normal, which still is not really descriptive. So, well, anyway, let's just try some value here. So remember that's right here at H1. And so we should stay below 1.5. Remember that from the last lecture? And for really big text, we should actually go really small. So we could like go to 1.2, for example. 1.2. Well, that actually doesn't look a lot different. So let's try 1.1, because I think the lines still look a bit detached there. And well, I think that looks better. But many times what I actually do is to adjust these values right here in the inspector. So I can use the arrow keys, for example, which adds or subtracts 1, which in this case is way too much. Or I can also use Alt or Option up and down, which will only add or subtract 0.1. So with this, we can easier make it look exactly what we want it to. So 1, for example, would be too little, I think. 1.2 looks a bit detached, at least in my opinion, but of course this is a bit subjective. And then 1.1 looks just right. And so let's keep it at that. And now also another thing that we can do is to add letter spacing, remember, which basically is to make big text like this here look a bit more natural. So there's some spacing between these individual characters. So let's maybe remove 1 pixel. And so 1 pixel, as you can see, makes a lot of a difference. So if we turn this on and off, then yeah, it changes a lot. And I think that this one looks a lot better, really. Okay, so this one I think is nice like this. So we don't need to change it anymore. So let's go to the next one, which is this here. And the first thing I'm going to do is to maybe make it a little bit bigger. So remember how the default is 16 pixels. And right now we don't have any font size on it, as you see here. So this is here the header text. And so let's go again here to our system. And so right now it's 16, remember. And so if we want to make it bigger, we can try 18 or 20. So font size 18 pixel. That looks about right. Let's go 20. And well, that's maybe too big. So let's stay at 18 and then also the line height. Now this one here is a lot smaller, so we can go like 1.5 or even bigger. All right, so that looks nice already. But again, let's experiment a little bit here. And I'm hitting now Alt or Option up. Okay, so this or this, they are both nice. So let me just stay with 1.6 right here. Now about this button here, or actually this link here, I don't know yet how it will look like in the end. And so therefore, I'm not going to mess with the size of this one just yet. And so let's go to this here, which is our H2. So that's actually this one and this one right here. So let's make those bigger. And for some reason I put them up here. Yeah, that's because these are reusable. So this is what I call the general styles, which are the reusable ones. And then down here I have the like component styles. So let's go to our styles here. And usually we might have this like in some other window, for example, so we don't have to go up and down all the time. But anyway, let's try, well, the 44 not. Let's try these 3 here maybe. So I just copied those and gonna paste them here. But you don't have to do that, of course. So font size, and the first one I'm going to try is 24. And well, actually that is probably the default. So nothing changed there. Let's go with 30. So that's a bit better, right? Let's maybe try also 36. And nice. I think this is the one I like, except here. Okay, so we should somehow change this one. And, well, we will get there. We will do this a little bit later. For now, let's keep it at this size. And since this text is now so big, we can now again decrease the letter spacing just a little bit. Let's say 1 pixel. Actually, minus 1 pixel. And that is actually a bit too much. That now looks cramped, unlike this one. So if you look closely, this one now looks like very cramped. That's not so nice. And here we can even go with half pixels. So minus 0.5. So that's actually better. Okay. So let's go here to our features titles, which are these ones. And let's experiment with a font size of 20 pixels right here. And that looks about right. There's also 18 right below it, but that doesn't give enough contrast between these two headings. So establishing these font sizes is also a little bit about establishing hierarchy between the different headings and in general between all the different pieces of text on the site. So this text here, of course, is more important than this one, and so it should be bigger, but not all too big, right? So anyway, let's now go to the next one. So let's maybe make this one 18. And then, of course, we need to increase its line height. So I used 1.6 up there. And so that should be nice here as well. Right. Let's just try 1.7. And maybe that's even better. So why not? We're just giving it a lot of breathing space. And that's not a bad thing. Now, just to keep things consistent, let's then also give the other one 1.7, because we don't want to have a lot of different of these values in our page. So if we use 1.7 in one, then let's go with that all the way, right? Next up, let's now actually change the size of this one. So I already have that selected here actually. So all of this element here is the testimonial box, as we can, as always, easily see with our inspector. So here we have grid 3 cols, or maybe the testimonial box is, yeah, it's just this part. So this is the testimonial box, and so the H2 in there, let's now make it a little bit smaller. And let's just see what options we have for doing that. So I'm going to experiment with these 3, which again, you do not need to copy, of course. This is just so you can see what is happening here. So 20 pixels, for example, but now that looks a little bit too small. So 24, maybe. That is better. What about 30? That breaks it into 2 lines. And so, well, then we need to go back to 24. So you see, that is very easy with a system like this. Otherwise, we would now have to like fiddle with all different numbers that we have in this range. For example, like, well, what about 29? Or 28? Or 27? Or 26? Right? You would have all these options, and that just takes too much time. All right, and that's why I like a system so much. Next up, we have some more, let's say, normal looking text, which is here the testimonial text. So that is this here. And so to keep things consistent with the rest of the page, so this is also some, let's say, normal text here, and this as well. And so let's use the same sizes and the same line height here. Just grab that, And here we go. So of course, this is a very simple page, so we can do things like that. So considering all this text here, like normal text, within a real and bigger page would of course not work like that. But anyway, here we are just practicing a little bit. And so finally we have here these H3 elements. So let's give them some font size as well. Let's say 20 pixels. And this actually looked like the default here. Well, anyway. Next up here we have these chair details, which are these 4 different texts here. And these for now look just fine. Well, actually, these are the text here. So the list items in there, right? But anyway, they look just fine for now, except maybe here for the price. So the price is a very important element here, and it's already bold. And so let's also make it bigger. Maybe the size here of the heading. So that's 20 pixels again, right here. So the chair price is probably actually all of this here. So since it is a flex container, I guess that, yeah, so all of this is the chair price. And so if we increase the font size on that, then these 2 child elements will inherit that, right? So let's do that, 20 pixels. And so that looks just nice. And we will actually a bit later format this link here. And so it will then be probably back to being a little bit smaller. So just like this one here, which we're also going to size a bit later when we actually design these links or these buttons. And finally, we have here the footer text. And this one is now actually too big. So this text is not so important. And so let's make it smaller. So for small text, what options do we have? We have 12, 16. Oh, actually, that's the spacing system, which we're going to talk about later. So we have 12, 14, 16. So the default is 16 right now. So let's try 12 and 14. 14, that looks good. That looks too small. So let's go back. And with that, we actually finished. So again, this is quite a small example. So of course, we couldn't apply all the guidelines, but actually we did apply more than it looks like. For example, we didn't justify any text, and we didn't center any text, and we probably don't have any text that is longer than 75 lines, except maybe for this one. But again, this text is not important, and so that is a good exception. So we're not going to count here, of course, manually how many characters there are, but it sure looks like less than 75. So I think with this, we created a good reading experience for our users. And so let's now wrap up this video and talk about colors in the next one. The next very important web design ingredient, which needs a lot of thought and consideration, is color. Now, working with color can be hard because there is something called color theory, which is actually quite complex. However, fortunately, you don't need to learn color theory in order to create awesome designs. All you need to know is in this lecture. And the first couple of guidelines here are about choosing the right color for your design. And so just like in typography, you need to make sure that the color of your website matches the website's personality. And that's extremely important, and I would even say one of the most important design choices, because colors actually convey meaning. And we all kind of know this intuitively already. So, for example, you wouldn't use a pink color on an elegant lawyer's website, right? Or you wouldn't use gold for a playful and fun startup. So those colors just don't really match the personality, and so they don't make a lot of sense. So to make it easier for you to choose the right color, let's quickly talk about the meaning about each of them. So red is the color that draws the most attention of all, and it also symbolizes power, passion, and excitement. So I'm not going to talk a lot about each of these colors. I'm mostly going to read them here to make it fast. So orange is similar to red, but it's a little bit less aggressive, and it symbolizes happiness, cheerfulness, and also creativity. Then, similar to these two is yellow, which basically means joy, brightness, and intelligence. Next up, we have green, which is my favorite one, and this one represents nature, growth, and health, and also harmony. Then we have blue, which is probably the most used color in web design, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that we humans have a tendency of associating blue with peace, trustworthiness, and professionalism. And so these are attributes that websites many times want to convey, and so they then use this color because, well, it works. But anyway, we then have purple, which conveys wealth, wisdom, and also magic, in case you're looking for that. Then pink does represent romance, care, and affection, which comes to us, I think, quite naturally, the meaning of this color. Then we have brown, which usually represents nature and comfort and durability. And then finally, we also have pure black, which once again symbolizes power, a little bit like red, but it also symbolizes elegance and minimalism on one hand, but on the other hand, it also shows grief and sorrow. So black is a difficult color to use, and many times for beginners, it is probably not the best color to choose. Okay, and once you choose your base color, basically, you need to make sure that you use a good color tone. So for example, don't just go into your VS Code color picker and choose a random tone there, or even worse, use one of the CSS named colors. So instead, we have multiple tools that we can use for that. One of them is basically a list of colors, which is called Open Color, and these are great colors that have been carefully designed to build beautiful user interfaces. And again, the link for this tool is on my resources page, and actually we're going to use this in the next lecture for our project. There is also another tool which is called Tailwind CSS, and Tailwind is actually a huge CSS framework, but many people just pick the colors and don't use any of the framework because these colors are actually beautifully picked and really nice and balanced. Then there is also Flat UI Colors, which has a little less shades, but this one is also quite popular to use as a starting point for your design. Okay, so now you chose your main color according to your site's personality, and you also chose the right tone, for example, using one of these tools. But now it's time to establish a color system. So in any design, you need at least two types of colors in a color palette. You need a main color and a gray color. So let's look again at this example that we studied before in typography. And here the main color is clearly this kind of blue here. Then for things like text, they use the gray color, which in this case is actually this very dark blue. And this is very important to understand. So just because it's called a gray color, it doesn't actually have to be a true gray. It can also just be a very dark version of another color. So in many designs, having a main color and a gray color is actually more than enough. However, if you want to take it a step further and add a bit more complexity to your designs, then when you have a bit more experience, you can of course add more colors. So besides the main or primary color, you can also add a secondary color, which we can also call an accent color. And in the case of this design example here, this accent color would be this nice red. Now this accent color should not just be any random color. Instead, there needs to be some relationship between the main and the accent color. And so therefore, you are going to need to use some kind of tool in order to choose your accent color. Okay, so let's say you now have your main, accent, and gray colors. Now, when you design real-world interfaces, you will always need some lighter and some darker versions of these three colors. And the lighter versions, we call them tints, and the darker versions we call shades. And this is especially important for gray colors, as you will usually need many different gray tones for text in different places or different states, for example, different button states. Now, when you choose the open color system or the Tailwind colors, then they already come with these tints and shades included. Now, if you use some other tool or came up with the color yourself, then you can also easily create tints and shades by using a tool called Tint and Shade Generator. And since we're talking about tools, for rule number 4, so for creating a nice accent color, you should actually also use a tool for that, as I mentioned before, and not just create a random second color. So for that, a tool like Peloton is great, or a tool like Coolors, which can actually generate entire color palettes. Alright, so with that, you chose all your colors and established a nice color system. And so all we need to learn is when and how you should actually use colors in your design. So usually the main point of using colors is to draw attention to the most important element on a page. So in these design examples here, you can see that the main color is always used to draw attention to the button, which is many times the most important element of a page, because, well, that's where we actually want our users to click, right? Also, the main color can many times be found in the logo as well. And by the way, all these designs that I'm going to show you here can also serve you as inspiration for the other design ingredients, for example, typography. So there's a lot to learn in all these designs that I selected, not just about colors in this case. But anyway, here again we see that the primary color is used on buttons, and indeed the same thing also right here. Now again, I'm passing quite fast here through these examples and these designs, but again, I actually want you to download the PDF of these slides and check them out by yourself with some more time. Alright, I just don't want the video to take forever. But anyway, we can also use colors to add some interesting accent or also to make entire components stand out from the page. So again, here we have some examples. For example, we have some borders going on, or we have some underlined text or some highlighted text. We have some color behind icons, or we also have some colored text. And the same here in the next examples. And here we see what I mentioned before. So where we have two entire sections standing out from the rest of the page, simply by giving them some nice background color. Then here are some more. And again, we have some sections that stand out. And we also have some nicely colored text here in the middle. And this one even has a gradient, which is taking it one step further. Now, another cool trick that many designers use is to use color strategically in images and illustrations, just like here. So here on the left side, you see the main color yellow appearing in those photos at the top. And in the middle, also the red color is right inside of the image somehow. While on the very right side, the main color orange also kind of appears inside of the illustrations. So using colors like this will give the design a really consistent look and feel. So this is actually an amazing technique if you can pull it off. Now finally, we also need to talk about the relationship between colors and typography. And the first guideline I have for you here is that on dark colored backgrounds, you can try to use a tint of the background color for your text. So basically a lighter version of the background color. And so like in these two examples here, this can give your text a really nice touch. Now this is not a hard rule that you need to follow, but it's something that many designers like to do because it can actually look quite nice and also a lot more natural. And that is especially apparent here in this first example. Now another one is that text should actually not be completely black. Like in this example here, the text on the right side looks quite heavy and uninviting to read. And so we should lighten it up and use some kind of or gray color. And the same is true here in this second example once again, where I think that the one on the left looks a lot nicer than the one on the right. And again, you might think that this is a very subtle difference, but it makes all the difference when you combine it with all the other design guidelines that I'm showing you here. Now finally, and this one is important for accessibility reasons, is that you should never make your text too light. Okay? So a few years ago, it was a huge design trend to have this really light gray text, for example, on white background. And this was really hard to read for people who don't have perfect sight. So to make your websites accessible to everyone, even people who have difficulty seeing, always use a tool to check the contrast between text and background colors using some tool such as coolers again. So a tool like this will give you something called a contrast ratio, which needs to be at least 4.5 to 1 for normal text and 3 to 1 for large text. So, for example, here on the right side, we have a contrast ratio of 2.9 to 1. And so this can be hard to read for people who don't have perfect eyesight. On the other hand, on the left side, we have the right way of doing it. So we have a huge contrast ratio, so 13 to 1. And this one will be a lot easier to read, and not just for people who don't have perfect eyesight. And the same for this one. So 2.9 again on the right side, and this one looks really off. So the text is really quite too dark, while on the left side with 5.1, it's actually acceptable. Okay, and that's it for guidelines about colors. Let's now apply some of them to our project in the next video.